5 years of drought. So it's time to move on for him. So I followed him.
What were your first impressions of the town when you first arrived at 15?
A lot different from Winchester. My high school graduated, my class I think was 300 and something, and our class was 49 in Germantown. So there's some culture shock, definitely some culture shock, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the difference. You know, Winchester is very suburban. You know, public high school was totally different. You know, we had property in the country and old farms and that, but Winchester was actually, I think, a town more like, somewhat like Kingston or something, maybe 45,000 at the time. But still full of apples. I mean, they call that the apple capital of the world. I guess Germantown was the home of fruit, good fruit. So it took a while. It was more like instead of being a small fish in a big pond, I was more of a big fish in a small pond. So, you know, sports was different, and, you know, the whole education process was different.
What was a typical day? What was a typical day as a 15-year-old like in Germantown at the time?
I moved here just after the end of school down there, so it was mid-June. I had always worked prior to that, but jobs were different. I actually got one of my first jobs was for Bob Ryder's mother, picking fruit and working on that farm, because he and Dad became good friends, and then his son was in my class, so picking through that, and then just kind of walking around town, you know, trying to make some money, getting to know, you know, the locals and that, and I don't know, being from the South, there was a lot of, differences in opinion. And how you treat people and manners, and, you know, I was walking around barefoot and I didn't think it was a big deal, but it seemed to be at the time.
Yeah.
So, and then also at the same time we sort of gained 3 stepsisters, and they were up, and they were more from like the country. They had a fruit farm as well, and they were kind of in culture shock as well.
Right.
What do we do? You know, what do we do? You know, there's no public pool to go to. There's no this or that. So we found all the, you know, swimming holes and all that.
What was it like growing up on a farm? I know, you know, I've heard that it's a lot of work. Even, you know, from the moment you can lift something, you're lifting it. What's the?
Well, we actually. My father was an owner and manager. I did pick fruit down there, but the closest thing to a farm that we had was my grandfather's, and he at the time was in his 90s, so all we had was, well, we had chickens and horses. So actually, you know, if you want to say that, I grew up on a horse farm, and there's work there, but it's nothing like a dairy farm, which, you know, I got introduced to that up here. And really didn't want much to do with that. So, but yeah, there was definitely a lot of hard work. There weren't a lot of jobs around here. So being that I had a little experience in the fruit industry, I was able to pick up some of that. And then finally I started mowing lawns in the cemetery. And, you know, once people got to know you and you're willing to work, then, you know, it was okay. You know, it just, I did meet a lot of people up here because there were a lot of dairy farms and that. And I could really see that, yeah. I mean, they'd come to school, you know, still kind of, you know, smelling, and they'd leave school, and, you know, it was work, 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 you know, for them, especially with the dairy farms. The fruit farms still were, you know, a lot of work, but I really had to give it to all the kids that had to grow up on the dairy farms.
Yeah.
Because it was just non-stop.
What was after high school? Where did you go from there?
Oh, I went to Delhi for a couple semesters. Ended up in an equine science program, pre-vet. Dropped out of that because I wasn't continuing riding. I eventually wanted to become a professional rider, and I moved down to Jersey, Essex County, and started schooling horses and had some success down there. And eventually I got sort of tired of that, not being an owner, being more of a rider, and that's about when I got into carpentry.
So
Building things rather than having, with a horse you can school it and get it right, and then somebody jumps on it and ruins, 2 months worth of work. So it wasn't as bad in the housing industry, at least. So.
What brought you back to Germantown?
I did a short stint in the service, worked out west, and always missed this area. Through the Midwest, saw all that country and everything, and there's just nothing like New York State as far as the greenness in the country. And I mean, everyone out there sort of thinks that if you say you're from New York, it's like if you're from New York City. And I had to remind them we have the largest state park in the United States, and we're not like that, and sort of that. But I, did always intend on coming back here and settling down, starting a business, and was lucky enough to meet an old girlfriend, and one thing led to another.
You said you did a short stint in the service.
Yep.
Can you tell me anything about that?
It was during the Vietnam era. Went to, did basic and in Fort Dix, New Jersey. Then did my schooling. I was supposed to take German language. And that was going to keep me out of the war, hopefully. And I got out there and they hit me with Russian, so I did that for a short term and said, no, I'm getting out of here. And I was able to get out under honorable conditions and tried to stay out in California for a while, but there just wasn't a lot of work out there. And then ended up in the Midwest in Wyoming and Nebraska and that area.
Were you drafted or did you?
I was drafted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where were you before you were drafted? Were you in New Jersey?
I had moved back here briefly.
Okay. What was the dynamic in the town at that time period? I know everyone's kind of on edge, but
well, locally it wasn't. I didn't view it as so much on edge. I was just one of the unlucky ones to have. I think they still had the lottery at that point, and because I wasn't in any type of school, I had no deferral. The biggest thing was, at the time, there were a lot of protests. There wasn't any support, really for the people that were over there. It was a bad war. But locally in the town, business, everything was thriving around here. People were building brand new car dealerships, and I worked for a company, Capital Valley, that we had huge buildings going up in Kingston and Rhinebeck, and the economy was very good. I was just sort of tired of New Jersey. So again, I wanted to come back here because it was a much different place, and I knew that there was some employment.
Right.
And there's definitely places to rent at reasonable prices and everything else.
When did you meet your wife?
I met her, I think, the first summer I was up here.
When you were
I believe it was in '68.
So when you were 15?
She was in the class. Yeah, she was in the class below me. We brought 2 horses up from Virginia, from my grandmother's farm, and she had a horse. So everyone that had a horse kind of got together and rode trails and did this and that. And when I came back, she just sort of was around. Saw her one day. I had started my business and I was renting a small place, and she went by one day and I waved and timing was great, I guess. So.
That's great. Now I know you're very involved in the parsonage and the history of the town.
Growing up in Virginia in the area, most of the Civil War happened right in my area. Mm-hmm. I think there's over 26 major battles right in Winchester. Being that there was a lot of construction, housing construction, every time a hole was dug, like in my area, we'd go pick through things and you could find musket balls, cannonballs, all these things. So history, was very important to me even back then. I didn't realize it. But then coming up here, aside from, people, well, you're a Southerner and you lost the war and all this, knowing that the age of a lot of the houses up here were similar, and with the stone houses and that, even older than in my area, but there were a lot of similarities. I guess sort of the similarity with Williamsburg, Jamestown, all that, as in our Dutch settlements up here. So I've always been sort of drawn to the old barns and old stuff.
Was there something that you learned that kind of blew you away, or really surprised you when you were at any point in learning about the history?
Part of the Palatine migration, I had never really heard about any of that in Virginia. I knew that as far as the history with the Revolutionary War, my relations were involved in that. They were also up here, Ticonderoga, Valley Forge, this and that. My father had always said that we came from a certain part in Germany, but he mentioned Mennonites, not Amish, but the Mennonites stick out in my memory, but that it was more that there was major German migration, and whether it was just in Pennsylvania, which I wasn't aware of what happened in New York until much later. So that was sort of a revelation that that all this happened, and the whole Livingston Empire, which you didn't really see as much in Virginia. It was more, I want to say, sharecroppers and this and that, with I don't remember any huge names comparable to the Livingstons.
We're in the parsonage currently. What is the significance of this building to the history of Germantown?
Well, it was our first parsonage. It's documented. We had a number of different families. I think one of the first black families actually lived here. On the rolls, this is where Alvin Sheffer is much more versed than I. It's just a piece of history that we can never replace, and it's so. We should be so happy that we weren't in Kingston during the 70s when urban renewal was knocking, or even in Hudson, knocking all this stuff down. And I attribute that to our smallness, or our local community, that we didn't need any urban renewal or anything else, and probably no one wanted it anyway. So we're able to save. I've owned a number of homes that from anywhere from the 1860s down to the 1780s, and that also has spurred my interest in history, just finding stuff, finding documentations and different construction and that, and just being able to see that where say people of your age and that, without these things you wouldn't know. That would have been lost and just in the books and not actually tangible. So and that's a great thing. There's still very many old houses around here they may not be open to the public, but you drive by them and you say, yeah, that was probably an early 1800s house or something. So.
Are there any other buildings in town that are, that you can think of that have a great historical significance that are, either private residence or, other buildings that are changed into other things over the years?
Well, we've had a number of Dutch barns that had been lost, that weren't documented. Mine, the one property that we owned went down about 10 years ago that I don't think was exactly documented. We have some pictures, but some of those barns that were built in late 1700s, early 1800s, nothing lasts forever. And because of their size and that, you've got to have deep pockets to maintain them and keep them. But we're lucky enough that there are some of the funds available, and we've had some state grants that have been able to help restore those and keep those, and keep the heritage around here. So
switching gears a little bit, in your time here, what do you think is the biggest thing that's changed over the years, either socially or economically, or even in the buildings, or anything that you can think of?
Well, socially, we've had a huge change since the early 80s with my lack of terms would be weekenders. And when I started my business in '76, basically you were working for farmers or middle-class people. Not a lot of money there. We started seeing some of the older houses being bought, or some of the more desirable houses bought by people that were, a little well-heeled than most of the locals. And that's where sort of my business started going. It was sort of a boon for a lot of the local contractors, because in the 70s, the economy around here was in the pits. People were like, there were still, I think the cement plants had just been shut down because of the EPA standards. A lot of the major manufacturers, because of the Air Quality Act, were shut down, so a lot of people were out of work. Economically, as I say, the biggest shot in the arm, I do believe, was this change in our society, with people, the Hudson Valley becoming more desirable as a weekend. They were starting to clean up the river. When I moved up here, the river looked just like the James River and part of the Potomac. It had that nasty, polluted color. We were starting to lose the oyster industry and the fishing industry in Virginia at that point because of the pollution. So are they up here. Over those years, it's turned 100% at least. The river's been cleaned up in both areas, the south end here. We've all, improved that way. And that's brought a lot more recreation. People are more interested in boating again and using our natural resources, where for a while there, it was, industry seemed to be, the controlling factor. And then we sort of smartened up at the end of the 70s or something, said, we can't keep, we've got no more eagles. We had pesticides up here. When I moved up here, you couldn't go down the road without hitting or avoiding pheasant or rabbits or whatever. And then by sort of the end of the 60s into the early 70s, all the pesticides and everything else were really starting to take their toll. You stopped seeing eagles, you stopped seeing pheasants, you stopped seeing a lot of rabbits. And that again has changed because, number one, we don't have quite the amount of fruit industry, but number two, they've changed. We no longer using those pesticides. So, the wildlife and everything, which is a big draw around here. That's, you know, part of an ecosystem that people love up here, even though we, you know, I don't know how many deer car accidents happen a year at this point, but it is a phenomenal amount. If you want to complain about that, then I could take that over not seeing anything. You know, it's sad, but you know, that has all turned really full circle since I've moved up here.
What is it? What is it that you love about the town? What what brought you back? What makes you stay? What do you think it represents?
Unity is a big part of it. Again, with the change in our social atmosphere, I think we've lost some of that, but the whole small town, I mean, you couldn't sit on your front porch. I often wanted to have a fake hand, because you could not sit on your front porch and not be waving at every car, because you knew every car. If I was going 60 miles an hour on 9G, my father would get a phone call from somebody saying, your son's speeding. You know, everybody knew everybody's business, and, you know, for us at that point, it was like a pain in the neck. But looking back at it, that was probably one of the best things that could happen, because everyone knew everyone and everybody cared about everybody's children, and just the whole dynamics of the small town. Even though it can be, you know, gossipy and whatever, at some points it's still the unity, I think, that kept me here. And the, you know, the open space. Even though I'm, you know, can be guilty. I mean, I put in development, you know, build houses around here, been accused of ruining a neighborhood or something, but we don't, you know, it hasn't been overdone in this area, and I don't think it really ever was suitable to, number one, we don't have the major attractions as far as the jobs and everything else, unless you want to commute to Albany, that, you know, I can see Germantown pretty much staying as it is for, you know, in my future at least, unless, you know, we have somebody decides to build a nuclear power plant or something, you know, where they're going to employ 300 people, or, you know, all of the our major industries have moved south. So it's kind of left us, we're not a bedroom community, but, you know, we're still small town. That's, you know, which I think is great.
What would you like to pass on to the future generations that live here? If there was anything that you could impart onto them, any wisdom you could impart onto them, or any ideals, or
probably, you know, be proud of where you came from, because, you know, we are unique. You know, I would think that would, you know, be one of the main things, that you don't realize what you have until you lose it, or until you're not there. As I say, being out west, you know, seeing the Rockies, seeing Yellowstone, and all those things, those are all great, but I mean, we have just as nice things here if you want to look at them. I mean, go across the river and the mountains, go to the river, just even ride around on our, you know, to the Taconics. Everyone doesn't have that. You know. Northeast is very unique. And even though New York State seems to be not user-friendly anymore, our area is, you know, is sublime, I believe. You know, it's just one of a kind.
what's your favorite place to stand and look? There's one place that sticks out in your mind that you just love to either be in that spot and look, or to look at, to be able to, you're glad you get to see it.
Probably one of the favorite places is the Rojan Creek Boat Club. Just, that's the mouth of the Rojan, looking out in the river. And aside from that, probably right looking over my pond behind my shop, and just looking out the open open area that, you know, we're all able to enjoy, whether we're riding quads, shooting things, or whatever. It's, you know, it's our space, and nobody's like there to sort of complain, or, you know, and we all, it's a, you know, it's greatly appreciated. As I say, you really don't know until you don't have it. Shouldn't say lose it, but what we have here.
Sarah, do you have anything?
Yeah, I guess I think it's really interesting. So you work in construction now, and yet you have this appreciation for history. I'm curious in what you do every day, how your appreciation for history impacts that, and also, I mean, this building that we're sitting in right now is however many hundreds of years old. Considering your relationship with what you do, what do you think 200 years from now, what will Germantown look like?
Well, I'm hoping that the deep pockets can keep the old buildings going, that, you know, we don't get taxed out of the county. As far as working on historical buildings, there's always a reverence there, because the amount of work that, I mean, we can just order lumber now, or if I have a mill, I can saw it up, but still, the amount of work that went into constructing a building, and something that was going to last more than 30 years, was just so great that you can't, or even digging a cellar hole by hand, where, you know, everything's machine done, and that is just, you have to think, boy, they really had to work for that. And, you know, and yet we had the natural resources for them to be able to do that, where in other areas they didn't. They had to use mud huts or whatever their locale would give. But because of the quality of the old growth and the quality of the craftsmen and everything else, that's why, you know, these houses are still standing. And that's, you know, I have to look at that every time I work on something that's over 50 years old. I mean, I wonder about the houses I build. Are they going to last 100 years? Or, you know, I sort of doubt it. Because no matter what you do, I mean, if you keep a roof on them, maybe they will, but 200 years? No. You know, even with our new technology and everything else, I don't see that. It's the big bad wolf thing. You know, if you build it out of stone or you build it out of brick, it's going to last. If you build it out of wood and don't take care of it, it's not going to last. So I guess that's my, you know.
Yeah.
Anything else? Sure.
We had, I guess we've talked a lot about some of the buildings. What about the people? What, other than the unity and everyone being a family, is there anything unique about people from Germantown? And maybe any stories you have, but you don't have to use names. But any quirky or interesting, what are the characters of Germantown like?
Well, everyone is related due to the Palatines. Nick, you're related to my daughter, you know, everybody's from the Palatines. There's been sort of a passed on or continuation of, well, that's the old Coons farm, or that's the old Harrelson farm, because we haven't lost all of our young people. That seems to be continued somewhat, which, you know, again, locals, well, you know, that's his son. You know, something, well, what do you expect? You know, or, yeah, happened again, his father was the same way, or, you know, that sort of thing. So we still have the familiarity with, you know, the family groups that we can still sort of, I hate to say classify, but, you know, sometimes you hit the nail on the head and you say, oh yeah, that's pretty much figured that one. his dad was a little crazy, or, you know, something like that. Or, you know, if you're in a city of 40,000, you're probably not even going to know your neighbor, you know, or know their family lineage, or something, whether they were fruit farmers back then, or, you know, coopers, or barely, you know, whatever. So that's, you know, that's still unique in our town. 200 years from now, I'm wondering, one of my biggest worries was when they talked about shutting our school down. Because I think if they do that, they're going to take the heart right out of Germantown. We're going to have a city of strangers, because no one will go through that K through 12 knowing everybody. And then we'll be, you know, we'll end up being some sort of fancy bedroom community. And in contrast, you can't have all this and still have jobs too, but I do wish we had, you know, the economy was a little much better around here. You know, whether things will change with, you know, our different technologies, with people being more willing to commute, but at this time there doesn't seem to be an abundance of decent jobs for younger people to stay around. So, you know, if I had to complain, that's one of my biggest complaints. I'm old enough where I'm not really worrying about that now, but my son's in business around here, and he works for some local people, but he's working for a lot of other people that, you know, are more deep-pocketed in that. Hopefully his business will continue. Whether my daughter will ever be able to live and work around here in her profession, I wonder. So, my wife is a nurse, and the people that she's been working for have continually sold out and everything, and now she's actually a hospital employee, because the last group of doctors seemingly couldn't afford to be on their own, so they sort of sold out to that, and that's sort of a sign of the times. It seems like we're all moving away from small business to sort of mega business, which, you know, will eventually affect us, but as long as there's the housing industry around here, repair and everything, there will always be some jobs, but there's a lot of people in the same boat. So, you know, the dynamics have changed in that way too. Because, I mean, when I went in business, there were maybe 3 or 4 local carpenters, and everybody knew you as a local carpenter, just like excavators, maybe 1 or 2 guys. Yep, he'll come over. It may take him 3 months because he's the only guy around, but, you know, now there's people from everywhere coming around here that you don't even know, or, you know, at the coffee shop, yeah, you used to know every tradesman or this or that. Well, now you don't have that. Now it's expanded, so.
People would have said that about you, either, oh, you know, that's your father's son, or about your children, oh, that's Hank's son, Hank's
Definitely.
mother. Like what
Definitely
sorts of things? Good things,
I'll have to read Nate on
troublemaking things? Okay.
We can pass.
All right.
Yeah, good things, definitely good things, and some, I mean, there's, you know, some sunshine and some clouds. So,
Of course, yeah.
with my children, no, it's all positive. No one would ever say anything bad about them, but at least not that I know of.
In 50 years, we'll ask them, and we'll
Yes,
find out the truth.
definitely ask them.
If you're good, I'm good. Is there anything else?
Yeah, is there anything else you want to add?
No, just aside from, I know this would be going out to everyone, but, you know, as far as our local people, our children that, you know, are around here, to maintain this, they have to be involved. If I'm head of the ZBA in Claremont, and one of the big problems is, as with any town, is getting younger people involved in the dynamics of the towns. the older people can't continue, and also they shouldn't continue because they may be outdated as far as their mindset. So, you know, to keep something like this going, are the people that are staying around locally have to be involved, whether it be politically or community-wise. They have to speak their mind and be involved.
I'm with you. I agree with that. Definitely. Well, thank you very much for doing this. We really appreciate it. It was good to have some
Thank you.
info and all that stuff. We'll get Sarah. We'll get your microphone there.